Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sonia Lockhart, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Black Farmer Fund. And I'm super excited um, to welcome this year's first Skillshare that we're hosting on liberation economics, and to introduce our host, Savannah D'Orazio. Savannah is the Impact Investment Associate here at Black Farmer Fund. She assists on the investment team with the development of BFF's integrated capital strategy, and her expertise lies in vetting prospective investments and performing financial due diligence processes within the portfolio. For the last 3 years, Savannah has been a full-time entrepreneur working in community wealth education, event production, and consulting for early-stage tech startups. Prior to joining Black Farmer Fund in 2024, Savannah worked with various investment funds, leveraging her scouting and financial analytics skills to negotiate deals in real estate and venture capital. She has also worked within experiential education settings, teaching gardening to elementary school students at the New York Botanical Gardens, and has worked on farm-to-table procurement for the Los Angeles Unified School District within the Urban and Environmental Policy Program in Southern California. Savannah has a BA from Occidental College in biology and an MA from Teachers College at Columbia University in education policy and public politics. She has received awards for distinguished research and data analytics, and is a Gates Millennium Scholarship alumni. Her personal goal is to reach more people than McDonald's, especially as it relates to positive impacts for women's health, climate resilience, and extracurricular opportunities for low-income youth. Savannah loves stand-up comedy, home cooking, and gardening. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Savannah to take it from here.
Hi, everybody. I see some familiar faces, or names at least. Thank you so much for being here. To be perfectly candid with you all, I've been having a rolling fever for the last 2 days. And so my body can't decide right now if it's hot or if it's cold. But one thing that I know was that I had to make sure I made it to this presentation and that we were able to have this conversation, because fewer things are more important, especially all things considered, over the last few weeks. So it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm just so excited. So thank you all for making the time. And again, like we said, this is being recorded. So please, once you've got the recording, share it with folks who you think it can help. And yeah, I think we can skip the icebreaker for now because you've already done some introductions in the chat. And let's go right ahead into the welcome and objectives. Do you mind just going back one slide? Thanks. All right. So our first objective is to understand business entity options, especially as they're relevant to agriculture and food-based businesses. And as an extension of that, better understanding what capital is available to a variety of business types, and then how to leverage those. And then we'll do a breakout session, or maybe depending on how many of us are in the call, when we get to it, we might just have like a group discussion on creative approaches to building generational wealth. And to set a tone just for this conversation, like I just mentioned, there are a lot of attacks on this type of work at the current moment. And so it's essential for us to both understand, and also to prioritize the ways that we can creatively navigate any changes that are happening. So that can be on a political landscape, that could be on an emotional, spiritual, physical, etc. front. And so I just want to emphasize that point that we here at BFF understand this very intimately, and it is exactly what matters to us most. And so, setting the tone for this conversation, I just want to say that, like, we have to approach this with an air of positivity and light, just because I think there are many more solutions than there are problems at the current moment. And hopefully, this conversation, yeah, we'll get you to a point of agreement with me on that front. All right, next slide. Thanks. So what is liberation economics? So for me, this is a community-centered approach to economic sustainability, right, that prioritizes equity and long-term wealth building. And the reason that it matters for Black farmers and food actors is that for many, many years, and even now, there has been a disenfranchisement of access and um, to land, to capital, to knowledge on financial literacy, and a number of other things. And so, as we create a new um, not just entity for us to actually do this work, but also as we think about how to protect and continue to advance the actual building of generational wealth, how we can do that in a way that that is non-extractive, right? Or that does not prioritize profit over people. And so as we have these considerations, whether it's, an approach to real estate or an approach to actual food or food-based businesses, or any of the different parts of the system that lead farms all the way to our table where we're eating. We have to understand who are the people involved, what are the systems that are actually creating this demand, and or how are we meeting it, and how can we actually do this in a way that makes sense, feels good, and is sustainable. As we can see, a lot of what is so I would say BFF is a great example. Our portfolio companies, which I'll spotlight one later, I think we really center liberation economics, both in how we understand what this does for all the people involved, but also how we leverage capital. We work mostly with patient capital, and we absolutely do integrated funding models, and I will explain more about that. If anybody has an add-on for the relevance here or a different definition to liberation economics, I would love to open this up and get anyone else's definition or interpretation or offerings on, relevance. That's if anyone has anything. Don't be shy. Anyone have an add-on for a definition to liberation economics or why it's important to you? Okay, y'all are quiet today. That's okay. I see some of our investment committee members are in here. It's lovely to see you. Okay, cool. So from what I'm seeing, we're going to roll with my definition, which feels good to me. But if you do have something different to add, please put it in the chat, or feel free to, you don't even have to raise your hand. You can just unmute and let us know. And I'd love to include it, because for me, as I built out this deck, it feels a little bit strange to build these things in isolation. And so, of course, I rely on not just myself, but also our community partners and how we develop definitions to create a shared understanding for this work. So if you think there's something to add, please, please, please definitely let me know, and we'll put it on here. For now, let's move on. All right, so one of our key questions today is to better understand business entity options. Can you put a 1 in the chat if you actually have an incorporated business? So the business entity that you're using is somehow incorporated. It's like an LLC or a cooperative or some other type of model. So go ahead and put a one in the chat so you can get a sense. Okay, and if you don't, go ahead and put a 2. If you don't but are interested in it, go ahead and put a 2. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Yarnell, for participating. John. Okay, awesome. Awesome. Okay, cool. So let's start by understanding what are these business entities, and then how can we use them in order to do this work, and then by extension get access to certain types of capital that might only be available to incorporated business entities and or other types. All right, so when we're first thinking about business entities, right? There's LLCs. An LLC is a limited liability corporation. That's what L, L, and C stand for. So I'll say that again. It's a limited liability corporation. I'm sure many of you have heard that many, many times. Fewer understand exactly what it means, right? So basically, it's a protective structure, and you can open these with legal support for less than $200 in pretty much any state. So you can open an LLC from a state that you are not from, and you can still operate out of that business. Some of the advantages to incorporating in different states, for example, have to do with uh, what you are required to share publicly. So, for example, there are some states, namely Nevada, Wyoming, Arizona, um, Delaware, that they require less reporting. And so you can actually use the LLCs in those states to, um, I would say, obfuscate what you're looking to put under those LLCs. Many people have many people building their generational wealth and or who are wealthy have not just one LLC, but many different LLCs, right? So sometimes they're operating a business out of an LLC. Sometimes an LLC is used to house, for example, real estate that they own. It might also be used as like a shell corporation to do transfer or passing of transactions for businesses. There are a variety of ways and use cases for the LLC. The biggest advantage to it is that it separates your personal liability from business liability, right? So in the case that something happens or someone's looking to sue, for example, instead of going after you personally, they would go after that business. And so if you've got multiple businesses, that LLC represents only what's inside of it. And so, again, that's why many people will have multiple business entities and structures. A cooperative is another model that can be incorporated as an LLC or as a C corporation or as an S corporation. But what happens with the cooperative is that in the legal framework or the writing of the actual documents, there's an inclusion of language around ownership. So when it comes to an LLC, that is it's usually a sole member who is the main controlling party, right? When it comes to a cooperative, the whole point is sort of the opposite, right? So there's a clarification on that point. But when it comes to the actual entity structure in the United States, at least, there really is corporations. So that can be an S Corp, a C Corp, a B Corporation. Can you put a 3 in the chat if you've heard of a B Corporation or you know of one or you kind of have an idea what B Corporations are? Okay, amazing. Thank you, KT. Okay, Yarnell, amazing. Sonia, thanks. Okay, awesome. So yeah, we're probably familiar with B corporations because they're like the better corporation, right? So it's like one of those entities that is focused on doing good. And so it has a different set of parameters and or expectations around the way businesses operate. And so, that could look like centering or I would say diversifying leadership. It could have to do with the way profits are shared. The difference between what you can see here all the way at the bottom, that nonprofit, and I'll talk about what a hybrid model is in just a second, but a nonprofit, for example, those are incorporated as 501c3s with the United States government. In that type of entity, you are not allowed really to have profits distributed to member owners. The way it works instead is that those profits, if any, are reincorporated back into the business structure in order to continue doing the service or the work that its charter documents has indicated, right? So sometimes, and I know I'm skipping around here a little bit, but I promise hopefully it'll make sense, and I'm totally going to open up the floor for questions, but the difference here, so with a nonprofit, is that you can have a nonprofit in addition to a hybrid model, right? So the hybrid model just means that the nonprofit, right, might be tied to a different type of corporation. So again, it might be an LLC or a C Corp. And the advantage there is that you can organize different business dealings under entity type based off of the goal. So BFF operates this way. A lot of our capital partners operate this way. When you have a nonprofit entity structure, you're able to do certain types of work under it. With us in particular, we work with a hybrid fund model. So we've got a nonprofit, and then we've also got an investment fund. An investment fund, it absolutely has to have a return on capital, right? That's a fiduciary duty. So we can't just say, hey, listen, there's no profits coming out of this. What we can do, and what we do is make a case for patient capital. We do extremely low interest loans. And so it's a way that our investors can still technically invest under that model without it, again, being extractive and or focusing a tremendous amount on making profits, right? And the important thing here is that the reason that this work is important is that, well, so many reasons, but in terms of the capital stack, right, there are few alternatives to capital where the founders or the companies that we look at can really go. So the reason for that might be that they don't meet the revenue goals. Maybe there's, something missing in terms of the founder's personal background, whether it's credit and how they've built that, or whether it's a personal liability that they are or are not willing to take on. When it comes to the sources of capital, right, which I'm going to go into a little bit more in just a second, it's best to understand the entrepreneur, the business, and the goal, right? So when it comes to these alternative sources of capital, it can be difficult for entrepreneurs or business owners to get any alternative forms of funding because they simply either don't qualify, they're not looked at as profitable businesses yet, or it just the amount of time that it takes wouldn't allow them to really sustain what these alternative funding sources would require. And so the beautiful thing, again, about a place like BFF is that we're able to both fund and or help transition ownership into the hands of folks that might otherwise not get a chance to do this at all. And so we can straight say to somebody, hey, listen, we're able to pair this loan with this grant, and you're able to do something that previously, or again, within a different type of funder, you might not have been eligible for. Okay. The last one I haven't discussed here, which is important to still understand, is a sole proprietorship. Okay. A sole proprietorship is when you are operating a business and it's just in your name, right? So the US government will recognize that. The way it works on your taxes is that you just file regularly, so just under your name, as if, all the things, all the business activity that you've done gets reported in that way, and you are taxed exactly as a sole proprietor. Now, the risk with that is that you don't have that corporate structure protecting you. So, especially when it comes to food-based businesses, let's say that somebody, something went wrong with your manufacturing, or they don't like whatever happens that leads somebody to either sue or make a claim on your business, there is no separation between you and the business at all. And so there are advantages to using some of these other entity structures in order to do it. But most people start as sole proprietors. I know I had my first business when I was 15 years old. I was teaching swim lessons. It's a pretty big liability because I was working with children in a setting that was arguably pretty risky, right? Like anything could really happen. I only had lifeguard certifications. I wasn't licensed as a water safety instructor at that time. And so I operated as a sole proprietor for a long time until it made sense for me to then open an LLC and operate my businesses out of that. Many people will start as sole proprietors, and then as appropriate, or once they reach a certain business revenue, then they'll shift over. I've said a lot of things. You now kind of at least have an idea of what LLCs are, so those limited liability companies, how a cooperative model works in relationship to those, what a sole proprietorship is, and then, of course, nonprofits, expanding familiarity by explaining how they can work alongside other entities as a hybrid model. I'm going to pause here for a moment. If you've got questions, I think it's probably best for you to just jump in and or put things in the chat. Feel free to ask. Yeah, I'll give a few minutes for folks to gather their thoughts or to ask any questions about business entity options. All right. Okay, I see you all don't have questions yet. As they come up though, please don't hesitate. I'm very open to keeping this more dialogue based. All right, so what are some of the decision factors to consider when you're deciding what entity to actually incorporate under? So liability, we've discussed that a little bit already, so I feel like that is good. Alex, I'll come to you in just one second. An additional one is tax implications, right? So when we're thinking about the difference between, for example, a C corporation, an S corporation, and an LLC. LLCs, you're taxed like as if you are operating the business solely. You're taxed on an income basis. When it comes to like an S corporation, for example, there are other advantages, like if you're paying out employees, you can get certain tax advantages for having hired other people. You do have to prove that you've hired them officially in some sort of like full-time or part-time capacity, and you've got to actually give them the relevant tax documentation for it. But again, depending on your business size or how you're actually operating, you can, no questions yet, just concerns about funding for nonprofits. Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely going to talk about that. Thank you for bringing that up. I see that you did a DM to me, so I won't call out who sent me that, but we will get to this in just a second. So I do want to address that there has been a major knock to the work that we are doing in DEI across the board, right? And I don't even like to describe it in that way, because it's really just justice work. And so much of what is being cut down has already been way overdue. And so it's extremely disappointing. And if you can't beat them, learn what they're doing. And I don't want to say join them, because we don't want to practice extractive funding models. However, all the things that are available to us and that we see these multimillionaires and billionaires executing on in terms of their tax strategies are also available to us. And so the most important thing is to increase your financial literacy in order to leverage and take advantage of the same things that they do. So taxes, by the way, are really just the government addressing with you where they want you to spend money, right? So that's how they incentivize behavior. So when they put out a mandate, or maybe they say, hey, look, you can pay 0% taxes if you're building in an opportunity zone, right, as defined by the federal government, et cetera. Those are all ways that they're incentivizing growth and or ownership and or business activity in order to sustain their values and principles around supporting the American people. Now, we may not be in alignment with that. However, that is what indicates those tax measures and how tax policy is implemented. All right, so we'll keep going down the list. So liability is the first thing to consider. Tax implications is the next. Operational structure, this is critical, right? So as we're thinking about cooperatives, as we're thinking about LLCs, as we're understanding who are the owners, where is the decision-making power, when and in what ways are we going to be, it really depends on the business, because I'm trying to address both farms as well as food-based businesses. And so in some ways the examples overlap and in others they don't. But point being here, in terms of operational structure, you want to understand mostly who's deciding on a variety of things, right? What the actual hierarchy within the business is. And then, of course, if there is profit, right? How and in what way will that get distributed amongst members? And then the last is funding eligibility. There can be some challenges to getting funding. So when it comes to nonprofits, for example, our reliance on grants, especially in light of the federal pause on a lot of these things, can be a significant challenge, which is why I didn't just put nonprofits on that last page. I put nonprofits with the hybrid model. I think that is kind of a nice hack and a way to both have a side of your business that services and has the purpose of what a nonprofit is really meant to do, while also having another entity so that you can continue to leverage other things. When it comes to the capital, we'll talk about this in a moment. Nonprofits are able to borrow. They are able to do a bunch of different types of, well, let's see. They are extremely restricted in a lot of ways. So that's why I want you all to see and understand best kind of like these other entities as well. Um, but yeah, it's not all impossible. Just understand that there's like a multitude of decision factors. These are just like the top four I wanted to highlight. Um, and when it comes to actually deciding and then implementing it, know two things. One, you can always change your entity structure. So let's say that like I've been operating with an LLC for a while and now I'm at a point where, hey, I don't think that this is the right structure for me. I've grown my team to this amount or I've hit this particular revenue number. I want to make an adjustment and shift. All fine, right? So those are adjustments that can be made. And then the second factor is that as you're considering getting different types of capital, when you've got multiple entities, you can always take in capital or leverage capital under each of them differently. So if you look at most large corporations, they have, and most of them are incorporated in Delaware. You can totally fact check that and look that up. If you look up a Coca-Cola, if you look up any large entity, almost all of them will be structured in Delaware. And if you'll remember when I first started introducing this, Delaware was one of the states that I mentioned is actually very protective of corporate structures. Now, it's the same type of entity that they tell early stage founders to make. Why? Because it's the preference from investors to invest in companies. The main reason for that is that they have a long history of dealing with corporate entities and structures. And so when it comes to the investment frameworks and paperwork relevant to actually getting term sheets through, as well as anything litigation oriented, they already have a body of literature as well as people who can navigate that more easily. And so it's like the most recommended entity type and location. All right. Can you put a 5 in the chat if that was new information for you? And put a 4 if it was like not new information. All right, cool. All right, awesome. Okay, cool. So a mix. All right. Let's go on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to dive into, oh wait, hold on. Somebody had a question. Alex, do you still have that question? I'm sorry I made you hold for so long.
Yeah, in regards to the transitioning of an incorporated entity, can you speak to some of the difficulties that are posed when, or if somebody wants to transition a sole proprietor LLC or like a single owner LLC to a multi-owner LLC? I've had a couple of farm clients who started as single owner LLCs. They ended up bringing somebody on that, they wanted to bring into the ownership, but they faced a lot of difficulties shifting from single owner LLC to multi-owner LLCs because with farms specifically, a lot of them don't necessarily have assets that can be easily liquidated in the event that one of these owners steps away. And so from tax purposes, from just financial management perspective, it's been very difficult to, actually create these hypothetical situations where they're parsing up some of their assets into 25% of that ownership if the 25% owner decides to step away.
Okay, so I want to just clarify the central part of this question, and it's a really good one. So you're acknowledging that there are differences sometimes in how folks have come to you, where they've started and they're a single member LLC maybe, or they're just operating as a sole proprietorship. Maybe they've got a partner that they want to bring on, but then there are some decision points on, hey, like, how do I actually bring this person on if maybe they don't want to be liable, or they don't want to include certain parts of their assets as a part of this business formation? And how do we actually get them to the table? What might be the right entity for them? And or how do we transition this ownership into a different structure? Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, cool. So a couple things. One, transitioning the type of business structure is pretty simple. For that, you can go to, usually you need some sort of legal financial consultation, which BFF doesn't personally give. However, they're pretty easy to set up, and it doesn't really cost that much money. Like, if you're spending more than a few $100 on something like that, please go to somebody else like that. It should be a pretty simple process. You could do it on your own even, but what I want to highlight here is that when it comes to shared ownership, okay, the structure that usually works the best, and the way that you can share ownership in it, is through a C corporation, right? So when I say Delaware C corporation, it's just because, again, that's like the most recommended structure. And the reason that I'm bringing that up is because in that type of framework, you can offer ownership to somebody, and you can do two things with it. You can offer vesting schedules and cliff schedules. So a vesting schedule is the amount of time that it takes somebody to actually fully own the shares in a business or a company that you're looking to bring them into. So let's say that you wanted to give this person 50% ownership in the business, and you're giving them a vesting schedule of 5 years. They would essentially vest 1/5, right, over 5 years. So 1/5 of that 50%, right? So 10% each year until they reach that 50%. So it's both a protection for you and for them. It also can alleviate the tax burden that is relevant to their ownership. Okay, so when it comes to like sharing, typically that entity structure is what works best. If it's just 2 members, you can do a dual member LLC. When it comes to more, that's when I think it makes most sense to switch over to a C corporation. When I mentioned the cliff schedule, that is a period of time of which you wait for somebody to actually earn any of their shares. So a cliff schedule is meant to protect the person who's formed the entity and who's bringing in the partner. Cliff schedule can be anywhere from a couple months up to a year. And that just means, hey, no harm, no foul. If you quit or I decide to fire you, you can walk away with essentially nothing, right? So if, again, in your model that doesn't work or doesn't make sense, you can shorten that to any given amount of time, but it's typical to have a cliff schedule as well as vesting in order to solidify relationships over time, especially when somebody is not willing to put up assets and or take a personal liability. So in that structure, both of those concerns are eliminated. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. I've talked to a number of like tax professionals about that, and have gotten a lot of different answers. And so, yeah, it's something that obviously also needs consultation from financial consultants on a particular instance of that business. But yes, that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for that question. Hopefully some other folks learned some stuff through that as well. All right, let's dive into capital types. A quick overview. I want to make sure that we've got enough time to also focus on what generational wealth means to us and how we can creatively build that through the work that we're doing. So in terms of capital types, all right, so the key question we're answering is what type of capital is right for my business. In terms of options, we've got grants, right? Grants are essentially, well, listen, anybody who works in nonprofits is going to get super mad at me when I say free money, because nothing's ever free, right? When it comes to grants, there's usually a lot of paperwork, and or there can be long application periods, long waiting periods. There's often no guarantee. Sometimes they can be recurring. Right now, as we've mentioned a couple times, like So much of the funding has been under threat and or already taken, which is extremely unfortunate. However, there are still lots of pockets of grants, and in light of what has happened, I anticipate many more opportunities popping up to directly serve the work that matters most to us. And so grants are always an amazing option because usually you can deploy grants along whatever it could be. Yeah. So, well, listen, I thank you for saying that, Jesse. So the freeze was just rescinded. Ready for this? In this political climate, it is my preference for at least the work that we do for us to always operate like this work is under threat and to continue preserving all of the ways that we can continue to generate money and bring actual wealth building into the work that we do. So I prefer that we stay aggressive around like real estate acquisition, land acquisition, ensuring that these entity types are recognized as like viable and important, that they're given proper tax incentives, and so many other things. I think there are fewer, more important things to be working on than regenerative agriculture. I mean, we have a clear issue with soil in this country. And we already, in my opinion, have extreme issues with feeding people and maintaining agricultural systems that are fair and lead to healthy lifestyles, et cetera. And we can see the ripple effect of that on the economy, on healthcare, and so many other things. And so, as we consider these capital options, um, I would say like trying to get all of them is the most important thing. And you can see that BFF, we do the nonprofit hybrid model. So it's very important for us to get grants. We absolutely have to apply for grants and continue that work. And then we also have an investment mandate, right? So we look for investors invest in us, and then we allocate along a deployment schedule that's appropriate based off of those investments and asks, right? So grants, good option, important, and can come with a lot of caveats in terms of what you can actually use those funds for, with the timeline on which you can use them, and of course, who they're given to. So grants can be given to for-profit businesses. They are often not. BFF, we have the luxury of having been able to do that and having done that. And it's our, it's our mandate to continue doing that. And I think that's amazing. It's also rare. So beyond grants, there are debt financing options. Okay. So these can look like loans, it can look like lines of credit. And then these, of course, can be, for example, there are like Sharia sensitive interest programs, right? So ones that respect people's like religious beliefs and don't they incorporate what would have been maybe an interest-based payment into the initial down payment, or maybe it's like just the overall package of lending so that they're consistent with a person's belief systems and or way of going about doing business. When it comes to loans and lines of credit, that is often based off of someone's revenue, their number of years in business, as well as how consistently they work with external businesses to actually increase those lines of credit. Credit is somewhat of a game that you can play. And that's why I also, when I mentioned at the beginning, having multiple entities, this is really important, because if I've got one LLC and I've got a second LLC, do you think I can take, so question for the group, how many loans do you think I can take out of one business versus another? Does anybody know the answer to this question? Do you know how many loans I can have in one business? Does anybody know? Or in a second business, let's say that I own two businesses. Does anybody know how many loans I can have per business? I may be asking it in a little bit of a tricky way, so I'll go ahead and answer it for us. It's not really limited in that way. So if I have an opportunity to take out a loan through one business and I'm representing what my assets and liabilities are in this business, but I'm still eligible for a loan based off of either my revenue and or what I'm showing as collateral. Collateral, when I'm describing it here, is anything that I'm putting to basically support that business work. So let's say that I own 1 acre of land, or maybe I have my single family home or whatever else. I can put that up as collateral in the business. So I can borrow against the equity in my home or in my business. I could even do that with some of my own accounts, right? So whether that's a retirement account or so many other things. So there are creative ways that you can get funding. There is not a limit when it comes to whether or not you'd get approved for a loan. That is going to depend on what you can sustain. And so they're going to look across each of your assets and liabilities to understand, okay, is this person over leveraged or not? Right. And so let's say that I want to take out 2 loans and I want to do both of them in one business. That's possible, right? So I can get an operational loan at the same time that I get a land loan. I could also separate that into 2 different business entities. I could take out 5 loans for one business, or and I can have 2 for one business over here, or I could have one and one. It really depends on your needs, but there isn't an exact limit. Okay. So sorry if I asked that a little bit confusing, but I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page about that. That the assessment of it really depends on your overall assets and liabilities, as well as your revenue and proven ability to grow over time. All right. This next one, right? So outside of debt financing is equity investments. So that's when you give a portion of your company or a portion of your, business or real estate or whatever else to somebody, and they take a chunk of that, or they become a co-owner and they exchange their capital for that, right? So you might have, it could be a tech company, it could be a property, it could be anything else. Somebody will come on as what's called a co-GP. So that's when they become a general partner alongside you, right? And so basically you agree upon the value of this investment. You might say, hey, my company is worth $20 million. And this person might say, all right, great. I'm willing to give you $200,000 in exchange for X% of your business. And so you agree on whatever that valuation is. And essentially, you can do one of 2 things. One, they'll always share an ownership, and you make a promise to them about what percentage of profits you share with them, right? And that, again, can be dependent on their ownership. The challenges there is that oftentimes when folks come in as equity investors, there can be caveats to this, including, for example, they might say, hey, look, we're taking first position on this. If the company goes down, if there's anybody to be paid back, even though I'm a 10% owner, you must pay me back first. Right? So again, those models might not be consistent with what we're looking to do in terms of like non-extractive practices, right? And at the same time, they're completely viable opportunities because you can even do creative structures within equity investments. For example, if you're not doing a safe note, you could do something that's called a convertible note. A convertible note is when you take an equity investment, but the note itself that's written is like it's like a loan. So it can be a form of debt financing. And basically what you agree on is say, hey, I'm going to say that you essentially own 10% of my business. And again, I'm just using that 10% as an example. We can do any other math on this to make it work. And what happens instead is that they say, okay, I'm going to give you this amount of money that's worth the value of that 10%. And here's the schedule on which you can either pay me back or I've earned shares in your company. And so you could try to make sure, hey, look, I just wanted this to be a revenue note, and I'm going to pay this back proactively, and I retained all the ownership in my business. Or you might say, hey, look, I decided that it actually made the most sense for me to continue leveraging this cash, and I do want you to share an ownership, and so you're going to stay right where you're at, and I'm turning this convertible note into a direct equity investment. Can you put a 2 in the chat if that makes sense? And if it doesn't, and you want a little bit more clarification on the equity investment part, go ahead and put a 3 in the chat. So 2 if you got it, 3 if you're like, I'm not so sure.
Savannah, are you there? All right, it looks like we're having a little bit of a tech. Oh, you're back.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Was I the only one that got knocked off?
Yeah, you just froze for a sec.
Oh, okay.
But you sound
Did you hear what I said about community-based? How long ago? Like a minute?
basically after you were asking people to put 2 or 3 in the chat.
Okay. All right. So we'll start at the community-based capital on crowdfunding. Is that okay? All right. Okay, I'm gonna keep going there. Sorry, everybody. I was like, what happened? All right. So, community-based capital, crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is an awesome option. The downside to crowdfunding is that it can be very capital intensive. It is expensive. It's essentially a marketing opportunity in play. When it comes to getting funds into your business, you can do it through an official crowdfunding model if you're opening what's called a Reg CF. That was only, by the way, they petitioned the US government to make this a different fund model about 10 years ago. It didn't previously exist. And they actually fought very, very hard for many years to make this a thing. And actually, one of the co-founders of this company called WeFunder was one of the biggest lobbyists to make sure that this could happen. The beauty of crowdfunding is that it allows for non-accredited investors. An accredited investor, by the way, is, I really wish I had made an extra slide on this. Y'all, I could teach like 10 sessions in a row about this. So I'll talk to Sonia about making some additional, maybe Skillshare sessions where I can continue the conversation on liberation economics. We're going to skip over what the accredited investor role is and keep working on these capital types, but it's definitely worth us returning to because it will highlight different examples of what's most important in terms of increasing access to folks that are not just wealthy to really participate in and benefit from the work that especially alternative businesses are doing and how they're not just getting capitalized, but also sharing profits. Okay. So crowdfunding run through a regulation crowdfund model. That's when non-accredited investors, regular folks who are not ultra wealthy or high net worth individuals can actually participate. The minimums can start as low as $100 and they can go up to whatever the indicated amount is from the entrepreneur looking for the raised capital. That is typically done as an equity investment. However, it can be done, like I had mentioned before, in other creative structures. So it can be debt financing, it could be a combination of both. Crowdfunding is awesome because, again, you get to leverage the marketing, which is pretty much not allowed for many other fund models. Okay. And then this other one is cooperative funding, right? So this can look like people who are in the business reinvesting their profits to help the business grow. This can look like essentially having a redistribution based off of different, thank you, Sonia, different operational models. All these types of capital, they serve different purposes. There are pros and cons to each one. So depending on the business entity that you've chosen, the operational structure, the tax concerns that you do or don't have, and the liability that you're willing to take on, any and all of these might be available at varying degrees. All right. Does anyone have questions on capital types? All right, let's go on to the next slide then. All right, so some creative approaches to capital. So there are revenue sharing models, there are community land trusts, and there are cooperative ownership models. Of these, they leverage different capital types in order to move forward. Any entity types work. So basically, a revenue sharing model just means based off of like the inputs from the company as well as the outputs, they're are going to be different ways that that money is allocated amongst the folks working in and owning that company. Community land trusts are where folks get together to actually buy and or own tracts of land. And then usually those are associated with particular mandates or expectations around the use of that land, right? So usually they're not going to be a buy and title, verticalize and sell. Usually they're like a buy and hold, although those can really depend. And then we've already discussed cooperative ownership models. So I feel pretty good about this. If folks have questions, we can definitely ask them now. But since I'm running a little low on time, I think we should skip over to the next one. Does anyone have questions before we go on? Okay. All right, let's keep going. All right. I wanted to spotlight a business that we actually funded through BFF. So here, let me just, because I've got this pulled up. All right. So I'm going to put this in the chat for you all to also click on or check out. But oh, interesting. It automatically does this AI stuff. Do you see that? Do you all see the blurb caption at the bottom as well? So interesting that it does that. All right, cool. So Leslie Woodward is a chef and an amazing, amazing woman. She's based in New York. She's up in Buffalo. Her company is a part of the BFF portfolio, and we were able to use an integrated capital strategy to fund her business. The reason that I want to highlight her is because she so beautifully fit into the BFF model in a number of ways, not just in her model of, how she sources sustainable foods and what her manufacturing practices are, how she leads the team and who she's hiring, but also in just that like ownership model. Like this is another example of a business that would have been really tough for her to get financing in a variety of other spaces, right? And so we were able to give both grant capital as well as like a low interest loan in order to fund her business. Here, I think we should definitely pull up her website so we can introduce it a bit. Sonia, I know you're sharing screen. Do you mind just clicking on that link so that they can see? I was going to show a video, but I don't think that we've got the time for it, which is okay. So she's got a plant-based milk company.
Are you still seeing the slides?
Nope, we see Edenesque. You can go ahead and scroll a little bit.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Full screen. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And literally from farm all the way to table, there's so much intentionality in who is getting partnered with and how, really focusing on resilient communities, the betterment of the environment, and the local economy. This business, its entity structure is technically, they're a C corporation, if I'm not mistaken. And so again, a way that she has been able to leverage all kinds of different types of capital before us, right? Before getting debt capital and some grant capital, she bootstrapped. She leveraged other types of loans and also has a partnership where, folks committed capital to help her grow and build out this amazing company. So I wish that I could bring Leslie to the call. Maybe we can have like an interview or follow-up where she highlights some of the like challenges and or decision-making points that helped her decide, hey, why should I use this type of entity structure? How can I navigate this partnership? What would it mean for me to take on debt capital? What is the collateral that I needed to demonstrate in order to actually get these loans? How long did that take, etc. So Leslie's amazing. I just wanted to highlight this as a quick example. But let's roll on through. I know it's 6 o'clock. I'm going to go over about 15 minutes. If folks can stay, great. And if you've got to hop, I totally understand. We're almost through. All right, we can go to the next one. All right, cool. So now it's just the focus on generational wealth through farming. So the third key question here that I wanted to focus on in today's call was how can we actually build generational wealth? This is a question that I am constantly challenging us with, and I think is really important because there's a difference between like what it's like at the startup phase, and then also understanding, okay, how can we preserve this to last more than just my generation, to sustain not just me, but to really be something that my kids or my family or my community or my team members can actually inherit and create a lasting legacy with, or roll into the future, right? And so there are some principles that I want to focus on. So that's asset preservation. So the examples are land ownership, equipment ownership. Um, Diversified income streams is another. So increasing how we grow our revenue. So understanding how we can use agritourism if that's a part of our business strategy that's relevant, or focus on value added products, right? So understanding, okay, if we've got, these types of products coming through the door, or maybe we're growing this type of food, or we've got this sort of access, like how can we maximize all the ways that this is getting used and or shared. And then the last is community reinvestment. And so I want to pose some questions to you all and challenge us to think about them together. And I think just based off of the size of the group, it's probably best for us to do just to share aloud. And if it makes people more comfortable, Sonia, maybe we can stop recording this part so that people feel comfortable sharing. And then we can start the recording again to just close out. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pause it.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. So I'm going to type in the chat some of the key questions that I would like for us to ask ourselves. All right, so from the group, here's how I summarized the key takeaways. So living off of interest, leveraging life insurance, very important point. We could do a whole other session just on that. Having a CSA base, using initial money and community trust to build and feed folks. Generational wealth looks like longevity, that what was created can continue to grow and survive in spite of all the things that go on and continue going on. Adaptability, shift in political contexts, relationship capital. Who do you know that has money or has land or has knowledge of growing, distribution, etc.? Years of land owned and passed down. The knowledge of what made things successful is passed down and used. The community is held together as time goes on, and then wealth can be defined outside of money. Those were my notes. We can totally add things, but yeah, let's go on to the next slide. All right, so resources and next steps. There are tons of funding resources. Now, it depends on what you're looking for, whether that's debt capital, whether that's a grant. We have at BFF a number of different ways that you all can be resourced. And if not us, we've got amazing co-investors, partners, friends, community groups in our ecosystem that would love to learn about what you're doing, service you, and help you get to a next step. One thing that I'm really proud of BFF for offering is technical assistance. If there's folks who get into our network or our framework and they're being considered for capital, we actually help them get support from it's like a third party, like CFO company basically, but they get a lot of that, projection support, understanding their revenue, etc. There's also legal support for entity formation that you'd have to go externally for. We don't like technically give financial or legal advice, but there are a multitude of places, and there are even some nonprofit organizations that you can go to that will help. Again, an entity formation should only cost a couple $100. And if you do it on your own, it should be even less than that. yeah, happy to follow up. If people have got individual questions about that, you can definitely reach out to me. And then community networks and organizations, as I mentioned, the next slide will show you some of our community partners. So the ecosystem, and this is really just like in the Northeast. So we've even got partners in other places, but we just highlight these groups. So there's education and training, capital markets, and then land access. So we'll share these in the slides after. I know I'm running through it because I'm totally over on time. Sonia had asked me, do you want to do an hour or an hour and a half? And I said, people can't sit through that long. And here I am dragging it out anyway. I'm so sorry, y'all, but hopefully this can get to you and we can follow up where you all might have questions. So let's go on. This is what BFF does. So we, support folks in a variety of ways to build community wealth, share in and develop knowledge and resources, and then of course build social capital through advocacy, policy work, and community accountability, amongst other things. So we have a variety of ways to fund people. So definitely, if you haven't already, either applied, if you've got a business that is like prepared for funding or interested in funding, you can visit our website and fill out an interest form. You can also reach out to pretty much any of us directly. Our emails and profiles are all on the website. And so, we'd love to help you just advance in whatever you're building. This one you can skip. Yeah. And yeah, this is the email. This is for the general inbox. So you can reach out to info@blackfarmerfund.com. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, although I suspect this is where most of you heard about this in the first place, so you're probably on that already, but if not, definitely, there are so many good resources that are put out there every single month. And so you should definitely sign up if you haven't yet, and then follow us across your favorite social media platform. If you've got a preference for LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever, we have growing social channels and consistently share both community resources and different types of access that we'd like to share, as well as just like upcoming news. So that's it for me. Thank you for your time. I'm going to hand the mic back over to Sonia.
Thank you so much, Savannah. And thank you everybody for sticking it out with us. As we mentioned, we're gonna send a follow-up email. It'll have the recording. It'll have a PDF of the slides. It'll have that link to the survey. If you have a minute now to fill it out, that would be awesome, but we'll also follow up with it. And yeah, just really appreciative for you guys for coming and engaging with us, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.